before midnight, my dad lifted his champagne glass and announced to 140 roaring guests, "At 12 a.m., I am handing the family company to my son." The crowd went wild. My brother smirked at me across the ballroom, thinking he had finally erased me from our family's multi-million-dollar legacy. My husband gently squeezed my hand. Everyone began the chaotic final countdown to the new year. 10, 9, 8. But they didn't know I had a countdown of my own. At 12 o'clock sharp, as confetti rained down and people kissed, I calmly opened my phone and approved one single, pre-drafted email. By 12:11 a.m., Dad's chief of staff frantically ran into the room, went entirely pale, and whispered something in my dad's ear. 6 minutes later, the music cut out completely, and Dad announced something that changed our lives forever. "My name is Chloe. I am 27 years old, and until a few hours ago, I was the invisible backbone of Whitaker Logistics. For the past 5 years, my life was measured in 80-hour work weeks, missed dinners, and skipped vacations. I built our company's entire financial infrastructure from scratch, modernizing a fading empire into a multi-million-dollar powerhouse. Yet, in my father's eyes, my hard work was just an unspoken obligation. To him, the only child who truly mattered was my older brother, Julian. Julian was the family's golden boy, a title he earned purely by birthright, certainly not by merit. He was reckless, arrogant, and viewed the family legacy as his personal bank account. While I was locked in the office auditing spreadsheets and sealing corporate partnerships, Julian was out networking at luxury golf clubs, taking unearned credit for the deals I closed. Dad routinely turned a blind eye to Julian's massive operational blunders, instantly covering up his mistakes while treating my flawless performance as merely expected. I used to think that if I just worked a little harder or stayed a little later, Dad would finally see me as a worthy successor. But the toxic dynamic in our household never changed. Julian was being groomed for the throne, while I was carefully positioned to be his permanent safety net, the brilliant younger sister who would quietly clean up his messes from the shadows forever. They thought I would just sit back and take it. They were dead wrong. The turning point came exactly 3 weeks before that fateful New Year's Eve party. As part of my routine end-of-year duties, I was deep in the company's internal ledger, consolidating our international shipping accounts. That's when I noticed a series of massive, unexplained capital outflows bleeding into a network of overseas accounts. Following the digital paper trail, my blood ran cold. Julian hadn't just been making careless operational blunders. He had established an unauthorized, illegal offshore shell company scheme to hide millions of dollars in devastating trading losses. Even worse, as I dug deeper into the encrypted files, I found my dad's digital signature approving the cover-up. He wasn't just turning a blind eye anymore. He was actively helping his golden boy manipulate the books to protect Julian's reputation as the incoming heir. Had I confronted them right then, they would have simply deleted the files, fired me on the spot, and locked me out of the system forever. I knew I had to be smarter than that. Instead of screaming, I went completely silent. Over the next 20 days, I became a ghost in the corporate network. Every single night, after the cleaning crew left, I stayed behind to systematically download bank transcripts, wire transfer receipts, and incriminating email threads. I compiled everything into a bulletproof, heavily encrypted dossier. Every forged document, every hidden liability, and every single cent they had stolen or masked was perfectly laid out. They thought they were smoothly clearing the runway for Julian's grand takeover, completely oblivious to the fact that I was quietly holding a financial nuclear option right in the palm of my hand. Just 2 days before New Year's Eve, the trap was sprung. Dad called me into his private corner office, where Julian was already waiting with a smug grin. Without a shred of hesitation, Dad pushed a thick legal document across the mahogany desk. He bluntly informed me that a woman simply lacked the aggressive instinct required to lead a legacy logistics empire. He demanded I immediately sign over my minority, effectively cutting me out completely. Julian leaned back in his chair, chuckling softly as he told me I was completely disposable and should be grateful for whatever crumbs they threw my way. The sheer cruelty of it was breathtaking. 22 years of being a daughter and 5 years of giving my soul to that company, reduced to a hostile forced buyout. But instead of letting my anger explode, I forced myself to play the part they expected. I let my shoulders drop, allowed my eyes to well up with tears, and let my hand shake as I picked up the pen. I put on a masterful performance of a broken, defeated girl. I signed the papers without another word, letting them believe they had successfully crushed my spirit. As Julian eagerly snatched the signed documents, both of them let out a sigh of relief, completely lowering their guard. They thought they had won a total victory. In reality, they had just freed me from any legal attachment to the disaster that was about to hit them. That brings us back to the high society New Year's Eve party. The grand ballroom was a sea of glittering diamonds, expensive tuxedos, and flowing champagne. At exactly 17 seconds before midnight, Dad stood on the main stage, his glass held high, proudly announcing Julian as the official new CEO. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause, and Julian shot me a look of pure triumph from across the room. He genuinely believed he had erased me from the family legacy forever. My husband gently squeezed my hand, offering silent support as the entire room began the chaotic final countdown to the new year. 10, 9, 8. Roared the 140 guests, but they had absolutely no idea that I was running a countdown of my own. As the clock struck 12 o'clock sharp, amid the deafening cheers, falling confetti, and clinking glasses, I calmly reached into my clutch and opened my phone. With a single, deliberate tap, I approved the pre-drafted email I had spent weeks perfecting. It wasn't a bitter letter to my family or a desperate plea to the board. It was a formal, ironclad whistleblower submission sent directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Attached was the encrypted dossier containing every single wire transfer, shell company record, and forged signature. I locked my phone, took a slow sip of my drink, and watched the room celebrate. The golden boy had finally been handed his crown, but he had absolutely no clue that the entire kingdom was already booby-trapped. The celebration didn't last long. At exactly 12:11 a.m., just 11 minutes into the new year, the heavy double doors of the ballroom swung open. Our chief of staff ran into the room, his face completely drained of color as he scanned the crowd for my father. He moved with an urgency that instantly drew the eyes of nearby guests. Pushing past the celebrating investors, he reached the stage, grabbed my dad's shoulder, and frantically whispered something directly into his ear. I watched closely as my dad's smug smile instantly vanished. His eyes widened in sheer terror, and his knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the podium. The automated SEC whistleblower system had worked with terrifying speed. Because the fraud involved active, multi-million-dollar international shipping assets, federal regulators had immediately flagged the filing and triggered an automatic emergency freeze on all of Whitaker Logistics' major corporate trading accounts to prevent further asset flight. The party ground to a sudden, awkward halt as the music cut out entirely. Dad desperately took the microphone back, his voice shaking uncontrollably as he tried to maintain control. He announced an emergency operational pause due to an unexpected technical issue, forcing the confused guests to exit the ballroom. Julian ran up to the stage, his hands trembling as he checked his phone, which was already blowing up with automated alerts from our banks. The golden boy had just inherited his crown, but within minutes, he realized his entire kingdom was legally locked down and heavily compromised. The next morning, the Grand Glass headquarters of Whitaker Logistics felt less like a corporate empire and more like a crime scene. I walked into the executive suite to find Dad and Julian pacing frantically, surrounded by half-eaten takeout containers and stacks of printouts. The second the heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, Julian lunged forward, his face twisted in a mask of pure rage. He screamed that I was a traitor, accusing me of intentionally destroying the family name and ruining his life's work before he even had a chance to start. Dad slammed his fist onto the mahogany desk, his voice booming as he demanded to know how I could betray my own blood over a petty boardroom dispute. They expected me to cower, to cry, or to beg for their forgiveness. Instead, I just leaned against the doorframe and smiled. I calmly looked Julian in the eyes and reminded him of the hostile buyout they had forced on me just days prior. They had completely detached me from the company. Because I no longer held any equity or executive operational standing, I was entirely free from the crushing legal liability of the fraud. Julian's jaw dropped as the brutal reality finally set in. He was facing immediate criminal prosecution from federal authorities for wire fraud and elder exploitation, while Dad was staring down massive federal fines that would completely wipe out his personal wealth. They had spent years trying to push me out of the inner circle, never realizing that the outside was the safest place to be when the building collapsed. 3 months later, the fallout was completely finalized. The devastating SEC investigation stripped Whitaker Logistics of its credibility, forcing the crippled company into a rapid, court-mandated restructuring liquidation. With the brand entirely toxic and trading accounts permanently locked, outside investors panicked. That is when I stepped in. Backed by a powerful group of private venture capitalists who had watched my work for years, I launched a new firm and bought the clean, core logistics assets for a mere fraction of their actual value. Julian narrowly avoided an immediate prison sentence by taking a strict, humiliating plea deal, leaving him completely broke and legally barred from ever serving as a corporate executive again. Dad was forced into a quiet, deeply bitter retirement, watching from his living room as the family name was scrubbed entirely from the building. They had sacrificed everything to protect a golden boy who possessed absolutely nothing of substance. Building my own empire from the ashes taught me that true power isn't handed down through a corrupted bloodline. It is forged through your own grinding worth. Now, I am deeply curious about all of you who have stayed to listen to my journey. What would you have done if you were standing in my exact shoes on that chaotic New Year's Eve? Have you ever had to break completely free from a toxic family? Below and let me know your thoughts. Meanwhile, Fritz.